Welcome everyone to the CASA Investor Summit at AGRF Deal Room. This session is about facilitating stakeholder collaboration to drive agricultural investment in Uganda. CASA, which is the Commercial Agriculture for Smallholders and Agribusiness Programme, aims to make the commercial and development case for investing in agribusinesses that source produce from small-scale producers. CASA's Investor Summit at AGRF is designed to provide a platform to inform participants about activities conducted by the programme at the country level in Uganda and Malawi. We hope that this will also have relevance to a wider investor audience and other investment support stakeholders across the African continent. Please check the other events that CASA Investor Summit is holding today. So in this 50-minute session, CASA will present a paper which outlines the stakeholder collaboration that we undertook with a range of stakeholders and an action plan that was developed during the Uganda Investment Summit for Agriculture at AGRF. The goal is to make the case for investing in agriculture in Uganda, how the government and letting you know how the government is responding to the action points that were identified during that stakeholder process. We hope that this will not only inform you about what's happening in Uganda, but also inspire potentially others to follow a similar approach to facilitating stakeholder collaboration and investment promotion. A link to the paper that's been produced is on the chat and is going to be on the CASA website as well, so please do look in more detail at that paper. I think the key here is to emphasize that CASA facilitated the discussion during the process and captured the insights, but the proposed solutions came from people who are working on Ugandan investment day to day, identifying areas where meaningful action can be taken. So you'll hear first from the lead researcher who will present CASA's paper and the main recommendations. Then you'll hear from a number of panelists about the different areas, forms of capital, enabling environment, and technical assistance. And then you'll hear finally from the Ugandan Investment Authority, who will present their priority areas for action that arose from that collaborative process. So first of all, I'd like to turn to Matt Hague, who's the lead researcher and produced the paper that the link is in the chat for. Matt's the research technical advisor at CASA and the lead author of this paper. He has almost 20 years of experience working on monitoring and evaluation across the world. So I'll turn to you, Matt, to give us the key findings from our collaborative process.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Alice, and good morning, everybody else. I'd like to take the opportunity to present our approach to this investor facilitation exercise, and perhaps a few of the lessons we've learned so far. We're hoping that this presents some ideas that other people can copy in the future, and we're certainly planning to follow similar approaches with future interventions in support of countries through AGRF with CASA. It's important to note that we're only partway through this exercise, so we'll have to come back to you later in the year or early next year to let you know whether it's really worked. As Alice introduced, the objective of investor facilitation is to try and understand and address some of the issues in Uganda particularly, which are impeding investment in agriculture. Though of course there's been many studies and workshops, other sort of events that have highlighted these issues, but I think the difference here is our approach, which puts the Ugandan authorities very firmly in the driving seat. I think through the facilitation exercise we try to address a number of different things, but a couple of them are the government can find it difficult to reach investors, particularly new forms of investors such as impact investors. It's a new area. There are new players, many of whom aren't located in the country. And I think also investors can find it difficult to find and understand government, comprehend the challenges they face when delivering for them in a compliant investment environment. So we wanted to make sure that this consultation exercise has been owned and led by state institutions, as these are the only people that can really affect any change to encourage investment. And what we've done is facilitate this consultation exercise around AGRF, which is a natural forum that brings business and government together. The process is intended to frame the key challenges and then provide a structure whereby the national authorities can inform investors of the areas where it will be making real progress in addressing issues. We hope that this will build avenues of communication between state institutions and investors, as well as making practical progress in addressing investor needs. CASA's role, as Alex noted in the introduction in all this, is as a facilitator. We're building on relationships that we already have both within the relevant investor community and also with the institutions in Uganda. So how did this work? Well, we've broken this down into 9 stages. The first stage is understanding the investment infrastructure in Uganda. Obviously, there are multiple entry points to state institutions. Addressing any of these investing challenges rarely relies on one institution, but requires working with multiple different bodies within the public administration. So we started working with Uganda Investment Authority, as this has the core thematic responsibility for investment, and it provides us with an opening into the ability to facilitate and engage with other institutions across government as necessary. This has been a long process, and we started talking to UIA 18 months ago. It's important that these processes are built on trust and arriving at shared objectives, and this takes time to develop. So if you're going to copy this model in the future, don't hurry this part. Most countries will have a similar institution like the UIA, some form of central body, perhaps in the office of the Prime Minister, but some institutional entry point that will facilitate that collaboration. One really important aspect that we're still working on is signing an MOU. So we intended, and we still do intend to sign an MOU with the UIA that will be approved by Parliament. This hasn't gone ahead thus far because of issues actually on our side, but I think it's an important tool that validates the relationship between CASA and the UIA, and also between CASA, the UIA, and the other institutions across government. So we'd recommend very much that this kind of agreement gets put in place at the very early stages. In the second stage, together with UAA, we mapped out the key stakeholders. We're looking for investors in agriculture in Uganda, other financial institutions, other agribusinesses, other value chain actors. But we're also looking for investors that are maybe not so visible, so partners who might be in agriculture but not yet in Uganda, or maybe operating regionally, and might be considering Uganda as an investment decision. So it's important to have this much sort of broader scoping of who the stakeholders are. On the government side, the UIA has been critical in getting us to understand what the core issues are in agriculture in Uganda, the institutional structures, the key policies, and the key people. In stage 3, we sought out thought leaders and other stakeholders that would help us facilitate discussions, help to build consensus and support around this whole idea. CASA is already working in Uganda. We have a number of different interventions. And so we have resources available on a mandate to get involved in supporting investors. If you're not in such a position and you're coming into a country for this purpose, then a crucial aspect is building this collaboration, and it's likely to take a significant amount of time to put together. In the fourth stage, we selected a short list of around 15 institutions and individuals and asked them in confidence to tell us what their challenges were around investing in Uganda. And so from this list of issues, we picked out those that seemed to be the most common, or those that had the best potential to really generate pragmatic, operationalized solutions. For the purposes of this particular paper, we categorized them into 3 forms of capital: technical assistance and the enabling environment, and different countries will obviously have different sort of thematic groupings of priorities. And for each of these, we found a champion, and you'll hear from them in just a moment. And they were very kind to moderate at the Uganda Investment Summit and help us coalesce the thinking around these 3 categories. In stage 5, the UAA has been busy building collaboration across Uganda institutions and taking ownership of this process. I think it's really important that not only is the national authorities seen as leading the process, but they actually are driving it. If we're seen as outsiders coming in dictating what needs to be done, of course, this will fail, as it has many times in the past. So this whole exercise came together at the beginning of July in the Uganda Investment Summit, which was an online event for 2.5 hours, where we brought everybody that we'd engaged with in the past year and a half together. with the purpose of really unpacking all of these issues that the interviews had surfaced, and getting to see which were the most important, and then working out who needed to do what, by when and how. For an online event, I would say it was very successful. I mean, given the extent of Zoom exhaustion, getting people together for 2.5 hours, I think was a significant achievement. But looking back at it, I feel that an in-person event would be the way to go if it was at all possible. It would enable you to really unpack all these ideas in the detail that they need, to build the relationships that success is absolutely dependent on, and to get some sort of understanding of local sensitivities and nuances, things that can be said one-to-one that can't be said 1-to-70 in a recorded Zoom meeting. Now we're moving towards the more operational end of the process under stage 7. The UIA has identified those areas where it feels it can make some traction in the near term. Obviously, we're not looking to solve everything, but we're looking to pick some low-hanging fruit and make progress on getting to the fruit a bit higher up in the tree. I think it's better to have traction on 2 or 3 things done in half a year than lots of rather more nebulous discussions around progress being made and nothing really achieved. The real objective here is to get some wins in, get some traction, and get some building between government and investors that things are really getting done. So stage 8, this is in part today's session. A little bit later, the UIA is going to present the areas where it's going to focus from the list that we developed in the summit. And I think presenting this in a public forum and to a regional audience is really a clear commitment towards investors. The government is listening to their needs and more importantly, is acting upon them. And I hope that the whole Uganda Investment Summit also contributed information to Uganda as they do their country pitch at AGRF later. And then finally, clearly, there's only a few things that are going to be picked up immediately. There are things that will take a longer time, and we'll need coalitions built across institutions, and we'll need budgets found. And CASA will be supporting UIA as they take these messages across government and build those alliances that are needed to make the change happen. We will set up working groups that will help bring all those different parties together. And whilst we don't have a mandate to supervise or oversee UIA, a lot of people have been putting a lot of effort into getting this whole process going. So we will be reporting back to you over the next 12 months to let you know how the whole process goes and where we end up. And so I think my time is done. And with that, I will hand back to Alice. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Matt. And that was a really useful summary of the process that we went through. And now that we're going to move on to some of the panelists to explain the issues that we explored during the Investor Summit and to tell you a little bit about the 3 breakout sessions that were held there. We're going to hear from, I'm going to take the part about the forms of capital. Then we're going to hear from Mahmood Hudda, who will talk about the enabling environment. And then finally, we'll talk to Jasmin Hidanovic about the technical assistance before turning to the Uganda Investment Authority to explain what they're going to do to take these issues forward. So first of all, I'm going to be talking to you about the forms of capital breakout session. There were many excellent people involved in that session, and I'm just the rapporteur from that. So I just want to emphasize again that these are issues and actions that were identified by stakeholders themselves during that process. But the principal issues that were raised about the forms of capital can be put, I think, into 4 different buckets. The first was around the importance of working capital. The second was around the sort of de-risking schemes around investment and the forms of capital that are provided. The third, which is linked to that, is the importance of first loss in some situations, first loss capital that takes a higher type of risk. And then fourthly, other potential types of capital that might be used. So let's take all of those in turn. Firstly, working capital. It's a fairly obvious point, but it was emphasized by many of our participants in the process that there's a need for working capital which should be provided by banks using the right terms to make them accessible to agri-SMEs. And that's particularly because many of the products, perhaps except for a notable exceptions amongst some commercial banks who are really trying to do this, there are few products that are actually well tailored towards agricultural seasonality and the needs of agribusiness in the working capital space. and actually long-term capital in the formal finance sector that can be on lent to the agricultural sector at a reasonable rate, including working capital that can be taken over a number of different seasons. It was also a focus in our discussions on strengthening the value chain approach, so that we're reducing the risk of the investee to an individual part of the value chain and increasing capital flows across the whole chain. And SME capacity building for increased investment readiness was a key theme, as was information to the agricultural SMEs on what sources and forms of capital exist, so they're more discerning about which they actually need for particular uses. Secondly, on the de-risking schemes, a need for effective de-risking schemes and existing credit guarantee schemes needing perhaps to be changed to meet the needs of smaller and higher risk clients in the agricultural sector, which tend to be overlooked, perhaps not surprisingly, but there might need to be quotas, more attempt to ensure that those guarantees reach those smaller and more difficult clients. We also feel that that might help with a better gender mix, and obviously the mix towards smallholder farmers that are normally excluded. The third area on first loss, and it's a type of de-risking scheme, of course, but it's a particular kind where capital is used to be mixed with other sources of capital that are less able to take a risk. And there are examples of that blended capital which have worked. We think that although it remains in its early stages, this blended finance approach needs to be promoted to raise the awareness of the approach and opportunities. And then finally, other types of appropriate capital, venture debt or mezzanine debt might be more appropriate than venture capital for commercial players interested in agriculture. And there's a need for more specialist non-bank lenders, so recruited through the use of incentives such as guarantees from donors and governments, as well as increased access to wholesale funds. And finally, some potential areas to explore are around grants for purchasing capital equipment to help with collateralization, and invoice factoring, which can be a good way to get working capital revolving more rapidly. So you'll see many of these explored in the paper. That was the first session on forms of capital. I want now to turn to Mahmood Hudda, who is going to talk to us about the enabling environment, which was the second bucket of three that you'll remember that we covered in the summit. His Excellency Mahmood Hudda is the Honorary Consul General of Bangladesh to Uganda. He's currently serving as Chairman of the President's Investors Roundtable on Agriculture. He's currently the Managing Director of Mairye Estates, a family business and farm that exports fresh vegetables and flowers to Europe and USA. He's also served on various boards, including Diamond Trust Bank and Fresh Handling Limited, and he's been part of establishing various businesses, including Uganda Meat Packers Company, Hub Entertainment, Nyumbani Decor, Great Lakes Food, and Mbawo Timber Works. And Mahmood will talk to us about what the summit decided with the key things on enabling an environment. Over to you, Mahmood.
Thank you, Alice. Welcome, everybody, and good morning. I think the points that Alice had reiterated in her speech are also going to dovetail on what I am going to talk about. And the key here for me as an investor is that, all right, sure we need infrastructure, sure we need the areas of finance and money, whatever you want to call it, or land laws. But the main issue for me is enabling environment. I'll give you an example. If you cannot plant anything in, if you plant and you cannot export it, you cannot ship the product out, you will end up throwing it away. So the enabling environment has three components where I look at, and those are issues having to do with either policy change, either fiscal intervention, or either simple coordination. And I will now go through the main points that were brought up into the paper that was discussed in July. And if anybody wants any further detail, they can refer to the CASA link and get all the details having to do with enabling environment. So enabling environment, stakeholder additionality. There is a need for closer relationships between the banks and other capital providers. For example, impact investors or development finance institutions to better understand investee needs and to enable them to find the most appropriate source of funding. The following needs to happen to build the relationship between banks and other sources of finance. Number one, agriculture finance should become more accessible to SMEs and smallholders. The Ugandan Agricultural Insurance Scheme should be rolled out nationwide for 13 priority crops. Number three, the Agricultural Credit Guarantee Scheme should be reviewed and redesigned to make it more accessible for banks. Greater stakeholder consultation would help to ensure the visibility and information gaps for some government bodies and government policies that should be supporting investment are filled. I think Alice had reiterated to a lot of these points in her presentation, and I probably assume that many other countries have the same issues. Either there is a lack of coordination, either there is a lack of commitment in terms of funding, or either there needs to be a massive paradigm shift in policy. And until these three things happen, I believe we are still going to be playing behind the 8 ball. The second area that came up in the deliberations was to create a centralized database. And the issue here was, look, where do we start? So a centralized database with agroeconomic information about farmers and agri-SMEs would make it easier for smallholders to access financial services. It would also help improve regulation and traceability. To create a centralized database, the agricultural sector needs to be digitalized, with the work of creating a database of farmers currently being undertaken by different government departments consolidated, regulatory barriers to sharing data reviewed, and digital candidature prioritized. Again, I think the main issue here is just coordination in terms of creating a database, but that should be the starting point. The next is an investment environment. How do we create an investment environment? By improving the investment environment for both local and foreign investors through A, developing and enforcing produce quality standards to facilitate trade and market access. B, popularizing existing investment one-stop shops, for example, the Uganda Investment Authority, introducing tax incentives for investors and agribusiness to stimulate agricultural investment and exports, and at the very least, a level playing field with neighboring countries. D, increasing public investment in processing-oriented infrastructure of export crops. For example, drying facilities, cold stores, silos, etc. And Uganda Investment Authority will go more into that into their presentation. So the question now is, who needs to act and when? The Ministry of Finance, together with the Bank of Uganda, should review the Agricultural Credit Guarantee Scheme. This can begin immediately and be completed in the next 2 years. And that would be probably your quickest method in terms of access to finance that is reasonably priced and can be accessed quickly, because the scheme has already been in place, but needs the bureaucracy, and a few areas need to be resolved in terms of the legislation part. The Uganda Agricultural Insurance Scheme and Uganda Insurers Association should begin work on expanding the agricultural insurance scheme immediately. This again is critical, as many other countries have insurance schemes or have subsidies in place to make sure that their farmers, don't die if they end up having a frost or a rain or a flood. And here again, coordination between the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Agriculture. The National Information Technology Agency and the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries can be working on a centralized database immediately. Although work on digitizing the whole sector is likely to continue in the medium term. Again, I will allow Uganda Investment Authority to expand on that, but the key is this is where we need to start. And the simple issue is you know, we've got to know ourselves, we've got to know who we are working with before we can start to really make any massive policy changes. The last one is the Uganda Bureau of Standards and Ministry of Trade and Agriculture can quickly target issues around understanding the enforcement of quality standards. Together with financing partners, they can also work over the medium term on investment priorities for infrastructure. I can tell you this area has really taken a lot of importance in the last 2 to 3 months, and specifically because of the various bans that Uganda had on either fresh produce or either maize or either poultry or milk. So this has become a very serious area. And again, the issue of enabling environment becomes extremely important for investor confidence and for de-risking the sector. Alice, that is it for me. I hand over to you. Thank you.
Mahmood, thank you very much indeed. And thank you for highlighting some of the really practical points that came through and really action oriented. And I think that highlights the way that we've tried to go about this. Just as an aside, if you do have questions, please post them in the chat. We won't have time to come to questions today, but we will look at questions that are in the chat that you raise, and we'll come back to you separately with answers to those if we can. So finally, moving to the third bucket that we explored during the Uganda Investment Summit, which was around the technical assistance. And to present that is Jasmin Hidanovic, who's an investment manager at AgDevCo, an impact investor investing exclusively in agriculture in Africa. He's part of the technical assistance team as well as the West Africa team, and has experience in investment management as well as designing, implementing and managing technical assistance projects across the African continent, including in Uganda. So Jasmin, look forward to hearing from you about how you capture the findings from the summit.
Great, thank you, Alice. So yeah, as we discussed, agribusinesses in Uganda, but also on the wider African continent, are in need of technical assistance, and I'll be referring to it as TA going forward. So the importance here is to de-risk investments and to make these SMEs investable, but also to scale and deepen their impact. Now, there's 3 different buckets of TA that we discussed. There's core business support, so support to the SME itself, the value chain technical assistance, as well as the support partners, institutional support partners. So I'll be taking each of these in turn. Firstly, the core business support. There seems to be a limited pipeline of investment-ready SMEs, and that reflects a need for core business support to get these SMEs into a better shape to make them investment-ready. Specifically, we see that SMEs struggle with basic governance and business processes. So think about things like environmental, social, and governance standards, tax and accounting requirements. And we see that on the supply side, actually TA is not always matched to what the business needs or what their financing needs are. So to address this, we identified a few points to address. So first of all, there needs to be an increased investment in incubation and innovation, with TA providers helping SMEs to grow, and this will also include peer-to-peer support between funders and incubators. Specifically, there's an importance to for incubators to develop businesses over a period of 1 to 3 years so that they have a track record and that they can then pass on these SMEs to investors once they've become investable. There's also a need for identification of business challenges and to address them by convening all stakeholders, public and private sector, and including both finance and non-finance areas, and really making sure that there is needs-driven training. There's also a need, as I mentioned, for specific training on software that supports tax and accounting, and this is something that may take some time to put in place, but it's definitely something that we're seeing across the board as being an important area to address. And finally, it's important to also recognize the challenges around corruption and that it's important to work towards better registration of organizations as well as better governance. When we look at the broader value chain, we see that there are particularly TA needs upstream towards smallholder farmers who lack extension services and who may not get them to the extent that they need it from farmer organizations. So there's also some limited clarity on what the value chain development needs are and what the investment opportunity is. But we see some points for action, which are about building the capacity of leaders of organizations, both SMEs and farmer organizations, and providing advice and finance to the sector, and just making them more aware of what types of TA are actually available. It's also important to expand extension expertise, particularly focusing on things like food safety, post-harvest handling, and not just limiting extension services to production. And it's really important to provide training at the local level. And finally, it's important to have a better coordination along the value chain to identify what investment opportunities are across all stages of the value chain. When we look at the wider ecosystem of institutional support partners, we see that there are some development needs as well. There are financial service providers that are not always understanding the needs and the appropriate products that are required for the agriculture sector. And another challenge is that there can be weak business advisory service providers that SMEs rely on. So we see a need for innovative advisory service that is client-led and really is relevant to the services that are needed to address the issues that SMEs are facing. And this will also require the strengthening of the capacity and the business focus of existing farmer organizations to make sure that they are more effective and can advise the farmers they work with more effectively. So just to summarize, out of all these points, there are 4 key action points to address for stakeholders. The first one I already mentioned, which relates to incubation, where donors and government will need to provide ongoing financing for incubation and innovation to really help businesses grow sustainably. To really make sure that once these businesses are incubated, they can be passed on to investors. And I said this can take 1 to 3 years to develop a track record, but it's important that incubators, investors, agribusinesses start the dialogue immediately so that they build a relationship already from the get-go and so that they can be passed on more easily further down the line. I had already mentioned also the need for TA for appropriate tax records, accounting, and governance systems. So putting these software systems in place may take time and will require capacity building of the teams that work at these agribusinesses, but is really important. One point to address in the value chain as well is that agribusinesses can start to organize farmers into groups to make them more efficient. This not only makes it more efficient from an aggregation perspective, but also by being able to provide quality extension services more easily. And finally, there's also a role for government to play, and in particular, the Ministry of Agriculture, Animal Industry and Fisheries, in order to assess the current farmer training infrastructure and to see whether it's still fit for purpose, the extent to which existing training really serves the needs of smaller farmers that are supplying agri-SMEs. And this is work that can start immediately. But on that note, I'll hand it back to Alice for further details. Do refer to the paper that's been shared in the chat.
Jasmin, thank you very much indeed. Really clear exposition of what was discussed. So you've heard from the 3 panelists about what was discussed at the Uganda Investment Summit. What's crucial now is for you to understand how those actions are being taken forward by the partners in that summit. And obviously that's where we were heading with all of this work and with the stakeholder consultations that we were having. That's the point. That's why we have been doing this collaborative exercise. So I'd like to now turn to the Uganda Investment Authority, who will talk to you a little bit more about how they will take some of the actions forward. As you'll have heard from the panelists, there are several actions that were identified. Some will fall to the UIA, the Uganda Investment Authority, others to other partners who we'll be talking to over the next few months and period. But in particular, UIA has some very immediate actions that it wants to take. And to present those, I'm very happy to welcome Peter Mulira, who's an investment executive at the Uganda Investment Authority. He works on programs for enhancing investment promotion and attraction with a particular focus on foreign and domestic investments. So Peter, please talk to us about what you're going to take forward. You just need to come off mute, Peter. We can't hear you.
I hope you can hear me now.
Perfect. Yes, we
thank
can.
you very much,
Thank you.
Alice, for the introduction. And I will be going into the areas which were discussed in the enabling environment, specifically in terms of the finance. And so to begin with, the area which we had looked at was agriculture financing, be making more accessible to SMEs and smallholder farmers. As Mr. Mahmood had mentioned before, Uganda, of course, has the Uganda Agriculture Insurance Scheme, which is put in place. We also have the Agricultural Credit Facility, which is under the Bank of Uganda. This is to increase the threshold for agricultural credit guarantee schemes in the country, as well as the fact that Uganda Investment Authority has been working with Uganda Development Bank to sign an MOU to increase and connect SMEs in the agriculture sector to access affordable financing. And the other way Uganda Investment Authority has been promoting accessible financing to smallholder farmers is through holding the PE, or Private Equity and Venture Capital conference, which has been running for the last 3 years, which was to highlight the alternative finance options to the different players in the agricultural sector. Uganda Investment Authority straight away will be able to work with supports from CASA to engage the Uganda Development Bank, as well as the Ministry of Finance, to review the agriculture credit guarantee scheme and understand the impediments faced by banks to access this. And this also will be in line with the Uganda Bankers Association to also get their input and make sure we get a way forward. The second priority area we had looked at during the enabling environment was to create a centralized database with an agroeconomic information about farmers and agro businesses in Uganda. Under the World Bank currently, Uganda is being supported to come together with NITAYouth, which is the National Information and Technology Authority, to create a farmer information management system and database for an e-voucher. B, to of course, agriculture marketing information system. C, an agricultural statistical database and data collection tools. This is an exercise which is going to be going on for a period of 3+ years to enable us to create a centralized area to support both our farmer groups and investors who are coming into the market. And at the Uganda Investment Authority, under the Small Medium Enterprise Division, are working on creating a database for small-scale businesses and farmer groups to support them in different areas, such as matchmaking, which B2B, benchmarking in terms of quality and standards, supply development for large companies looking to support the smallholder farmers, and also for reporting purposes in terms of the quality. At the moment, the SME division, as I've mentioned, of the Uganda Investment Authority is going to be produce a small-scale database to be shared, and with working with support of CASA, should be able to be done by the end of this year. Another key priority area which had come up is quality, and this was therefore an area we really looked under. And under the NMS Infrastructure and Integrated Agri-Tech project, this is for increasing the quality and quantity of agricultural products which are available to be exported to the region and international market. One of the key areas we're focusing on is, of course, the quality control, laboratories and testing of agricultural produce. This will also give us an opportunity to increase the focus on quality and meeting international GAP standards, which are very important for our agriculture sector. Under what Uganda Investment Authority has been doing is working with inter-institutional working groups under the Presidential Investment Roundtable under the agriculture sector to ensure that a defined pathway can be resolved by quality issues. At the Uganda Investment Authority, we host the One-Stop Center, which is a center which has 15 different government institutions which are able to facilitate and assist you in terms of starting your business in Uganda. Under this, you can visit our website, which I'll share, which is there, the ebiz.go.ug, which you're able to do all your required licensing, from registration to getting your trading license, to even your directorate of citizenship in terms of work permits and any other additional supports services, such as the Uganda National Bureau of Standards, as well as the Uganda Free Zones Authority, to avail any support and any system required for you to have a smooth and a clear way to start your business. The UIA will develop and implement a communication strategy for promotion of the one-stop center and supporting services as a way forward. Another key priority area which was focused during the enabling environment was an increase in public investment in the market enhancing and infrastructure, particularly for export-focused crops. The Uganda Investment Authority works in collaboration with authority from the Uganda Free Zones Authority, which is an opportunity, which creates an opportunity for export-oriented investment and job creation. The incentives include tax exemption on income from agro-processing. Uganda also was on the Uganda Export Facilitation Program, which is to set up a collection, a bulking and export facilities. At the UIA, together with the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Agriculture, and other central government partners, will identify priority investment needs and costs for agriculture export infrastructure in key commodity and food crops. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Peter, thank you so much for summarising those actions, which are really concrete and really exciting to see emerging from this process. And I hope that you that are listening will see that the process that Matt outlined and the content that was teased out in the Investor Summit has led to a really great set of actions that Uganda Investment Authority are taking forward. And we're really grateful to the UIA as partners in this process, critical obviously in terms of actually being able to take those actions on the ground and take responsibility for taking forward these areas that were identified and that they will be working on in the coming months and years. And clearly we are, as I say, very grateful to the UIA, and we'll be working with them and continuing to work with other stakeholders as CASA to make sure that those actions that were identified through this process are supported as they go forward. So we are just finishing in a couple of minutes, so I think we will draw this to a close, but I hope this has given you a good sense of where the process can work to tease out the key issues, where strong partners are critical in order to make sure that we are taking actions that are supported by the rest of the stakeholders, and that we can bring people together in that way to really deliver change, which will support the smallholders to access finance and to have the enabling environment and the technical assistance that they require to really thrive. So thank you very much for joining. Do please join any of the other CASA Investor Summit events that are happening through the day. But we really appreciate you joining this one. And thank you to all of our panelists, to Matt Hague, the lead researcher, to Mahmood Hudda, to Jasmin Hidanovic, to Peter Mulira, and also to all of the others who've joined and been supporting this process all the way through. Thank you for joining, and please do watch this space as we develop some of the actions we identified.
Thank you, Alice.
Thanks, everyone.